Summit to look and add its voice into this situation. I've been very privileged in Equity Group that we have a technical expert. Leshma, maybe you could start and wave. Leshma Shah, who joined us to lead this initiative. And we also have Dr. Helen Gishohi, another global expert on sustainability, and has helped us to really understand, dissect, and do several deep dives in the subject of climate change, the issue of sustainability, the causes and effects, and possibilities and pathways out of it. But listening to President Ruto repeatedly over the last 6 months, I've seen the passion with governments. I think governments have realized this is a very significant challenge. It seems that it is impairing all planning efforts by government. Looks like you can't plan climate. Climate chooses the direction, and as a result, it really, in most of the countries, offsets all plans that governments are having, and that explains the urgency. But listening to him more and more and more, I've realized somehow the real ultimate solution of solving the challenge of our times, the challenge of our generation, lies with the private sector, and particularly here in Africa. I don't want to take blame, but if you study the history of human interaction with nature, it started changing in the 1830s. By 1930, it accelerated. The late 90s or mid-90s, the Industrial Revolution, and that's the beginning. That's when truly the rain started beating us. And here we are now trying to retrace our steps and saying, where did it start and what happened? If you look, then the Industrial Revolution represents the economic activities of the private sector. It was innovation, great innovations of all times, but innovations that really advanced the human activities at the expense of nature. And nature started bleeding. And it took us so long to realize nature was bleeding. And bleeding, we called it climate change. That's how the bleeding manifested itself. And essentially, when you then say, how do we stop climate change, we must explore answers in the economic activities that caused this thing. I don't want to say we are lucky in Africa, but we cause only 2% of the bleeding. Why? Because we only have 3% of industrial activity of every nature. And that is the correlation, very limited. So what then it means is that we, as Africa, we have little to undo. What we have a lot to is do the right things. Just do the right things. Because 90% of our nature seems to be in solid state. The question is, why don't we change our practices? Avoid the practices that caused the bleeding. And then, essentially, then it means we have no legacy systems as African businesses. And if we have, they are not of scale. They're of a small scale. So it is like a beginning of investment. And the question to me is an investment decision. It's not a cost decision for business. Or the way we look at equity, we say it's investing in the right manner, the right way, and in the right tools. If you do that, then you avoid the pitfalls of the past. The good thing is we seem to be very lucky. 65% of unutilized arable land is, we own it. Let me use the right word. We own it, the African continent. Yeah, there is great sense in ownership. Title is everything for the business. Without title, then you have possession. So that's why I use the word ownership as a continent. And if we really own it, then we can take care of it, because there is alignment of interest. We have vested in interest in it. And we can utilize that arable land in a better way that it doesn't cost the breeding that we have talked about. That's one. The second aspect of it, and which I enjoy most, is that there is a weed, or a sailweed. The water in the oceans and the seas is rising. Every boat in the water is rising. The current prices of agricultural commodities can finance the exploitation of the 65%. If you look at price, we're talking about global inflation, but global inflation is substantially contributed by two things: energy, particularly gas, and agricultural commodities. What it means is that the market is giving us an opportunity to support us in financing these investments. It's the market that is financing because of that high premium price. For business people, we look at the market and say, wow, the price is just light. The ease of reaching break-even point is much easier. The time to break-even point is much shorter. And then looking at business people, I say, why? Wow, what an opportunity. So for us at Equity Group, we are looking for investors who want to go into agriculture, because we know short time to break even in the process, market that supports demand. So essentially, two of the major problems of business are solved: cost structure and market. So it's a question of productivity and light technology for us to do. The second aspect of it is endowment in mineral resources. When you look at the solutions so far that have been innovated, they rotate allowed batteries and hydrogen. Those are the real big issues. And if you look at them, 40% of the mineral resources that goes to those technologies, they're in Africa. And I'm asking, isn't that an investment opportunity? And you can see, if we were to change the global technology, then you can see the land we have, or the length of the runway that we have. You invest today, but you are certain of demand for the next 30, 40 years to replace the current technologies. So if you have that long investment horizon supported by market, then you can see the investment opportunity. So for those who want to go to production, refinement, value addition in those critical green minerals, we are willing to support and work with you along that journey. So this convening of breakfast has a very huge price of asking the business people to make the bold step of investing. Investing means capital financing. And so we'll be complementing everybody else, because the biggest debate about climate change is financing. The sustainable, certain investment, financing that can happen is capital. Why? Because there is a return. So what we thought we could do is seeing these two huge opportunities, And also, of course, we don't also forget wind, sun for solar energy, geothermal because of the Great Rift Valley, huge investment opportunities for clean, sustainable energy. Even before you go to the batteries, even before you go to everything, the opportunity of investment. So for me, what I thought is that why don't we come as business people together and say, what a massive investment opportunity for our generation that can change the course of the world, can reposition the global economy and give prominence to the African economy because of the role it has to play, because of gifting of RAD. And we have not talked about labor. 2.4 billion young people by 2050. Labor that we can change our education system to ensure it has the skills, the competencies that will ease these investments. So I thought, why don't we put our heads together and really put a statement to the government and says, yeah, we're willing to partner with the African Union and the African governments in solving this problem. We'll bring capital finance as business people, but to do that, this is what we need. Starting, Peter, with a predictable investment policy. That is number one. Peter, number two? I had called your name out.
You providing the finance.
Yeah. So essentially the second one, of course, after policy is consistency. These are investment. We need policies that are consistent for 10 years. Private sector, we act best when there are incentives. The structure, either of tax, either of other forms of incentives, we put it on board. Yeah, I can see my friend nodding. What else? The fourth thing we can put on the table. Yeah, yeah, of course. Why are you looking at Ambassador? Ambassador is a diplomat.
So you need a good enabling environment, consistency and longevity, as you say, but also ambition. Because if the government isn't ambitious, there won't be sufficient incentives for business to be able.
Very good. And maybe lastly, we add appropriate infrastructure to reduce the cost of doing business. So I thought in just over one breakfast, we could be able to list the things, and then we say, as the leaders read their statement of the African Climate Summit Declaration, we also read ours. Jackson, you agree? We read ours and say, this is our commitment, but our commitment has asks, so that we get the government priorities right. And Jackson, because you have said yes, the next stop with my friend Sander, 2 weeks, we table this to the UN. And say, UN, as you think this is what the African business leaders think. Or this is what the private sector in Africa think. Africa holds the solution, and we have decided to make it, to align the solution to the private sector, because the private sector has the capability to innovate, to reinvent itself, and it's driven by opportunity, investment opportunity. It makes just logical sense. And then hopefully, together again, we go to Marrakesh. The Bretton Woods, it looks like the ducks are in a row. Nairobi, 2 weeks UN, a month Marrakech, Bretton Woods, Hopu Frebanga and his team, and then the UAE. COP28. Within 4 months, we'll have completed the journey. That explains the urgency of this convening. And we said, I will be bold enough who set the pace. We know you are responsive. We hold you to quick response. And we are lucky that Assistant Secretary General Sanda, in charge of Compact, is here with us, so she can go with the advanced copy and make sure we have a plenary session on the subject. And Dr. Jackson will do the follow-up. It's as easy as that. And as in the finance sector, we follow with Mokta, IFC, we follow with Benga at the World Bank to ensure we have a slot in market. And then hopefully, we'll have put our voice on the agenda, and we'll have given a private sector direction. The biggest reason why things haven't happened is private sector is always underestimated. In developed economies, the private sector is 10 times bigger than states, naturally. States only take tax from the private sector. You can't be taking tax from private sector and be bigger than private sector. Tax is maximum 30%. It's simple logic. So essentially, it is important for the private sector to really have a voice and because it eventually carry the responsibility. And if we then do that, then hopefully we could be able to do. I think I've prosecuted my case to the best of my capability. But colleagues, I think I want to open the opportunity through Minor to facilitators to have views and opinions, and then hopefully we can have a team that before 11 can put. Let me give the apologies of Joseph, the CEO of this summit. He was supposed to speak to us at 7, but he was called. But what he said, we'll give you a slot to read your statement so that your statement is included in the African resolutions. So it will be very important we cross the dots so that we're able to do that. Thank you very much for turning up in great numbers.
And thank you so much, Daktari, for really setting the pace. Sometimes I feel when Daktari speaks, it's like a teacher, or what do you think? You know, that pointing out, I saw people getting ready with their notes anyway. And I think it has been said very well that we are here to amplify this particular voice and pick your opinions. But just before we get to that session where we're going to get some of these particular ideas that you want to bring forth, and please be penning them down because we have special rapporteurs at the back who are really taking notes of everything that is being said here. Allow me at this particular time to invite Stephen Jackson, the UN resident coordinator here in Kenya, to say a word or two. Please kindly, a round of applause to him as he comes.
Yes, I think I'm going to say Mwalimu James from now on. And friends, good morning. I hope Bishop Kariuki is still here because I need advanced forgiveness for 2 sins. The first of them is the sin of pride, because I exerted undue influence to be the next to speak. The compensation is I'll be very brief. But Sanda and I both need to sprint away this morning to go and join the United Nations Secretary General. So apologies for that. I'll come to the second sin as I finish. But James, I want to echo you very much in what you've just said. Those of you who were listening attentively to when President Ruto opened the summit yesterday, and I'm sure you all were, listening attentively, will have heard him talk about the opportunity lens that he wants to bring, he wants us to bring to the climate emergency discussions globally. Recognizing that Africa is on the front lines of the climate emergency, but recognizing that Africa is also the solutions provider of choice. Whether, James, as you've just said, that be around renewable energy, where Africa has the largest natural endowment of resources for that, whether that be about the production of food in a green and sustainable way, where Africa has the largest remaining reserve of untapped, uncultivated arable land, whether that be around carbon capture, where Africa has one of the 2 lungs of the planet. There is massive opportunity as well as massive challenge. And as I said last night to the Africa Business Leaders Coalition, when Africa's business leaders hear opportunity, their ears prick up. None of the promise of what I've just described will be delivered without you, without the private sector. And so that's where this declaration that you are preparing to sign and launch this morning is so critical. And I'm absolutely delighted at that late-breaking news that there will be this opportunity to present the declaration to the summit. I was going to suggest, James, you and I talked last night, that on the way to all those exciting places, New York and Marrakesh and the UAE, that we make a little stop at State House. Maybe we don't need to now if we're going to be launching the declaration today at the summit. But it is vitally important. The private sector, frankly, will either deliver or not deliver the future of the planet through capitalizing on these solutions and many more. And so a declaration that sets out your vision for that, but also makes those requirements clear in terms of the enabling environment, in terms of consistency of that environment. And, by the way, big theme of the summit, the cost of capital to Africa and in Africa. When the Secretary General and President Ruto sat down yesterday, that was a big topic of conversation. Why is it so much more expensive to borrow for Africa's development and for Africa's part of the climate struggle than it is for the rest of the world? And how do we change that? So your declaration is going to be absolutely vital. That brings me, as I close, to the second sin for which I need the Bishop's pardon. United Nations Kenya is going to be delighted and honored to witness that declaration as you sign it this morning. But the second sin is the sin of untruth, because I won't actually be here to witness you do it. I will witness it afterwards, and I hope I will be forgiven for that. But you can count on my signature on behalf of the United Nations so that this declaration has us as your partners going forward. So, asante ni sana.
Thank you so much, and of course we hold you to account to that. Of course, in the house is our own very homegrown Sanda Ojambo, the United Nations Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director, UN Global Compact. Please put your hands together as she comes to speak to us as well on what we can do as a global private sector.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's really great to be back home, also to see so many familiar faces and friends in the room. I'll be brief with my comments. As Stephen has said, unfortunately, we need to leave. But I think the gravity, but also the opportunity that stands before us, is spoken to by the number of people in the room, the energy, the excitement. I think the opportunity that Dr. Mwangi has laid out for us in terms of the journey and the opportunities to really articulate a strong private sector voice. I have just 5 points, no sins, no exam questions, just 5 points from my side. The first is really about the centrality of the African continent. And there is no time like the present. We're here at the inaugural Africa Climate Summit. It's interesting, it's been 28 years of COPs, as many people will say, and I know it's one of President Ruto's agitations. What have we been doing for 28 years? I think the challenge has been that Africa has never had the opportunity to articulate a uniquely African point of view. I also reflect on comments made by our Secretary General, who says that he's also never really seen a uniquely African private sector coalition come to the table and advance its arguments. So there's a lot going on in this moment that really is of significant importance. Our continent, the two gentlemen before have spoken to it, any transition that is due to happen in this world, the climate transition, the energy transition, food systems transition, digital transitions, all have Africa at the center. I think the question is, how do we turn that into an investment opportunity and not something that we're going to regret at the end of it all? So that's my piece on the African continent. We are at a truly remarkable moment. I think the second is reflection on the climate crisis and where we stand. We've heard the messaging, in the lead up, and we'll hear it today. It's important for us to see this truly as an investment opportunity and not to see it as a continuation of a narrative about Africa being victimized and not being well positioned. I think the investment opportunities will come forward in many different ways, and we'll see that through the continuation of the Africa Climate Summit and certainly COP28 in the UAE. But what is really important, I think, and I want to highlight from the UN perspective, is the need for credibility, for accountability, for transparency, and for strong partnerships in what we do. No one sector is going to tackle the climate crisis on its own. It's not a public sector government responsibility. It's not a private sector responsibility. It's certainly not a civil society responsibility. But all three of us working together can truly take us over the line in terms of where we need to be with climate. Lots of UN processes leading into this. The Secretary General released a high-level expert group report on what is needed to truly act on the climate crisis. That is widely available, and certainly for those in Kenya, my dear friend Stephen Jackson can advance perspectives on what truly credible climate action looks like, what strong adaptation measures look like, and certainly what we need to do to make sure that the loss and damage agenda evolves. The private sector, a couple of key things. Yesterday, we had a meeting of the UN Global Compact's Africa Business Leaders Coalition. A number of you in the room are members and were present. It was great to have that discussion. I just want to close by, I think, 5 key messages that came out of that. I think the first is the power of the coalition. And that's why seeing this room full of willing participants really highlights that, voices collectively can drive things forward. The second was, again, a call for a predictable policy environment. Stability in the business environment was obviously critical. Looking at climate and the opportunities, these are 10-plus year ahead investments. We do need policy predictability and a stable business environment to thrive. The second was incentives. It's interesting to note that more incentives continue to go into continuing to finance oil and gas exploration as opposed to providing solutions for renewable energy. How do we shift some of these imbalances so that we're going in the right trajectory for ourselves and for the planet? The third was really to look at what the clear investment opportunities are within the climate crisis and to move forward with those. And then finally, again, it just reiterates the power of the collective. So our Africa Business Leaders Coalition, as I say, is working towards and in support of the work that is being done here at a continental level, bringing many of our business leaders together. At this juncture, let me just thank James Mwangi, who's also the co-chair of the ABLC. It is co-chaired by a lady called Puti Mabenga, who's with NASPERS in South Africa, and many of the leaders here present are part of the ABLC. Peter Ndegwa, my dear former boss as well, is part of the ABLC. Martin Ochieng, who is Sassini CEO, and also the chair of our local network in Kenya, is a member of the ABLC, and many of you in the room, I don't want to get into naming you all. So from the UN perspective, similar to Stephen Jackson, and certainly from the UN Global Compact perspective, very pleased to be able to witness this important moment for the private sector here. Again, we too will witness the document from a distance because we'll be away, but happy to really endorse all of the efforts being made here today. And congratulations, and thank you for all you're doing for lifting up the Kenyan economy and its work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanda. Because of time, allow me to quickly as well introduce Julius Opio, the Board Director, International Chamber of Commerce, to say a few words as well. Please put your hands together for Julius as he comes as well.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning once again. I'll be very, very brief with my remarks. My name is Julius Opio from the International Chamber of Commerce. We're an international body that has business representation from around the world. We are represented in 130 countries, 45 million corporates around the world, and we promote policies and work very closely with private sector and present to policies to government. In Kenya, we're about three years old, and we are driving a number of initiatives when it comes to climate action and business sustainability through the Environment and Energy Commission. We are focusing on climate finance, sustainable finance. We've had initiatives in that regard. We're looking at e-mobility and charging infrastructure. We did a submission to the National Assembly, got it adopted, and today we can even see the kind of initiatives that are running with e-mobility and charging infrastructure. We've done initiatives on renewable energy, clean cooking. We're looking at ESG reporting and initiatives, Scope 1, Scope 2, and then also Scope 3. We're working very closely with the NSC and other institutions to see how we could possibly bring in Scope 3 reporting compliance within the corporates. but also cascade the same thing downwards to the SMEs. So that's an area where we are looking at when it comes to automation. So there's an opportunity in that regard. And then how do we link that now to green finance? Because what we're saying is there's a lot of funds out there, but SMEs are not able to access these green funds, and we need multilateral organizations, financial institutions that can borrow or get financing and onward lend to SMEs using green financing solutions and services. Another area we're looking at also is carbon markets and monetization. Recently, the Climate Amendment Bill was passed, but from the private sector, we still have concerns in regards to the kind of projects we're doing. We are planting trees, we're doing a lot of net zero initiatives, but it's very hard to get carbon market monetization. So this is an area that needs to be addressed, and we're trying to ask how government can step in and see how we can monetize our credits. The circular economy is an area of interest when it comes to waste management and recycling. Green building also is an area we are working with our partners. So ladies and gentlemen, what I would like to say, the International Chamber of Commerce is the only business membership organization with a UN observer status. So Dr. Mwangi, what you're asking for is quite possible. If we come together through the International Chamber of Commerce, we report into Paris, we work very closely with the WTO, we are working closely with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We'll be able to table some of the initiatives that we're trying to put forward through a formal framework. So we also work closely with other BMOs in Kenya. So we have KEPSA, we have KNCCI, KAM, and many other business membership organizations. So in conclusion, as ICC Kenya, I would like to say we are playing a very pivotal role in advancing green growth, climate finance solutions. So sustainability is no longer an option, but a necessity. Together, we can build a future where economic prosperity aligns environmental stewardship. So this is an opportunity for us to seize as businesses in Africa and to see how we can position ourselves and participate from a global perspective. So we should take the lead when it comes to climate action initiatives. And I strongly believe if we get a document together, table it the way we are talking about it today. I know we have all leaders, captains, leaders of industry in this room. We'll be able to get a voice through the UN bodies and also through the United Nations framework on Convention on Climate Change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julius, and certainly the entire room would agree that we would score very highly on carbon credits if they were to be effectively put in place. At this moment, ladies and gentlemen, I'll ask to speak about the importance of codifying the private sector's role in climate action, and we have Rosa Duarte Mutero, the managing partner at ALN. Rosa, if you could kindly make to the front as she comes, she will help us understand how do we do this periodically, annually, to ensure credible delivery. A round of applause to her as she comes. Welcome, Rosa.
It's a good gentleman, especially because I'm prone of tripping. I'm a lawyer, so I will not promise to be brief. But I'll try very hard to keep within the time that we have been given. As lawyers, we provide solutions, so I want to answer some two whys, what and what next. I'm glad that at this sitting, we are not discussing why we need to address this issue. I think the era of deciding whether there is global warming or not, and like the UN Secretary General actually said, we shouldn't be talking about global warming anymore. We should be talking about global boiling. And that's the reality. But the reason why is because one of my favorite quotes by Robert Swan actually says that the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And that's what we are trying to address today, that nobody else is going to save this planet. And we are built for a time like now to be able to arise and save our planet. The other thing that is important on the why is a quote by Ronald Reagan, and he said, outside of its legitimate function, government does nothing as well or economically as the private sector. That's just a truth. And it's true because everyone has their own duties and their own assignments. And so government has its duty and its legitimate function. And then private sector needs to come in and do things economically and well. And that's the why. That's why we are in this room. And then we ask ourselves, why codify it? If it is so obvious that we can save the planet as human beings, and if it is so obvious that private sector is the one that can do it well, why did we think, or why is there an idea of a statement? So the idea of a statement is to make sure that we are all driving towards the same direction. The truth of the matter is human beings are only known to work within codification. Do you think that is true? Do you think that is true? I used to wonder why we never used to keep traffic rules in my part of the world when I went to the West. And I found out it's because if you jump the traffic lights in the West, you'll find the fine in your post office address, isn't it? The fine is instant and immediate. If the fine is instant and immediate, you toe the line. And when you think about the amount that you need to pay, and it sounds like it's $100 or 100 pounds, you will not jump the traffic lights. That's how human beings are made. We either respond to carrot or we respond to stick. We don't work in amorphousness. And so this is the point. This is why we are codifying it, so that we can make sure we are all working towards the same direction. Now, the statement that we are calling the Africa Private Sector Statement provides guidelines for the private sector on how we can pull together to make sure that private sector and public sector together can achieve the goals around climate action. So that really is the why. I want to answer the question about who, because a lot of you may be wondering, where did this statement come from? Who created it? Why wasn't I called? And where is my input in it? And so what happened is there will be a Nairobi Declaration, and the Nairobi Declaration would be signed by the governments, basically the public sector. So what happened is the private sector then came around and galvanized around the Nairobi Declaration. We have worked very closely with the team that came up with the Nairobi Declaration so that the public sector statement and the private sector statement will align. I know I said that private sector knows how to do things economically and well, but without the public sector, we will not be able to function. So the Nairobi Declaration and the Africa Private Sector Statement are fully aligned. The areas that we are covering, and we'll talk about those very briefly, are the same, so that there is no misalignment, there's no one speaking French and another speaking English. We're all speaking the same language towards the same direction. So we got private sector as you know it, and we had representation from the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, we had representation from KEPSA, we had representation from the East Africa Business Council, and I'm sure between those three organizations, all of you are part of one or the other of them. And then we had people from private sector. So we had ALN, which is the leading alliance of law firms in Africa. And we had Equity helping us to put together the statement and putting everybody in the same room. We also had Coca-Cola as part of the group that helped to really put this framework together. And like you heard from the previous speakers, we had the UN Global Compact, and we had the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council just come alongside us, and that is why they are witnessing the statement that we are looking to sign. So that's the why, or that's the who. Who came together and put the statement? The answer is all of us in the room. What does it cover? So this statement sets out a call for action. We set out what we expect the public sector to do, and then we are setting out what us as the private sector are committing to do. The statements are general, and I will explain why they are general, different from the Nairobi Declaration. The Nairobi Declaration is very specific about the targets that they want to meet in percentages and numbers. The private sector statement does not have percentages and numbers because we would be expecting each company to set out their percentages and numbers on what it is that they are looking to achieve. So we have covered the topics of climate finance, and under that, of course, green investments. We've talked about decarbonization and what is private sector looking to government to provide in terms of ensuring that there is a carbon market, in terms of ensuring, of course, that there is just transition, which are the big words around decarbonization. We've taken time to talk about green transition minerals because this is a big part of the wealth that sits in Africa. And what is Africa going to do, and what is the private sector going to do around that green transition minerals? Food and agriculture goes without saying. Dr. Mangi likes to say 60% of the arable land sits in Africa. And the truth of the matter is, if that is the case, then this is an area in which private sector needs to make sure they are inputting into to ensure we have critical infrastructure that makes sure that food and agriculture is at its optimal. We've talked about nature and carbon sinks. Carbon sinks ideally are areas where there's more, they take in more carbon dioxide than they emit. And Africa also sits with the resources that does this, one of the largest carbon sinks sits in Africa. We also talk about adaptation and resilience, and our commitment to ensure that climate finance is invested in this area. Lastly, and most also importantly, we talked about sustainability and reporting, because it doesn't really matter what you do if you're not able to do it sustainably. And if there is nothing that can show what you're doing by reporting, because reporting goes with accountability. A lot of private sector has been hit very badly by greenwashing, and it's because of accountability and reporting. The ability not to appreciate what we are saying around our green work, our sustainability, and thinking through what does this actually mean for what we are doing? Where does it actually add value, and is it really adding value? A lot of us are prone to hearing, oh, there's something that's happening in X or Y, and you run and say, yes, we want to support it. But are you sure that the benefits that are coming out of the efforts that you're putting in are actually real? And I think as private sector, we need to be very careful around greenwashing, because your company comes out in very bad light. And we've seen the number of big names that have been hit by greenwashing. So we need to be very careful. And we are pointing that out as private sector as one huge problem that we need to look at. I want to conclude by asking then, what do we want each of you to do? In short, we want you to do about 5 or 6 things. One, we want you to sign the declaration. We want you to sign the statement. We don't want you to leave this room without signing it or giving us your commitment that you will sign it after you read it. The second thing we want you to do is go and do an internal assessment. As a lawyer, I should never be telling you to sign something before you assess, but this time I am, and I will explain why. We are not confused about whether you should be signing the statement or not. And we are not confused about whether your company can do or make commitments. That's not the question. The question is, which commitments will you make? That's why we're asking you to sign the statement and then go and think through which of the commitments will you make. All of you will fit in one of the areas that I have talked about. Not one, actually. We expect you to fit in many of them. And then we expect you to put SMART goals around your commitments. We want goals that are accountable, goals that are measurable, and more goals that are reportable. Let me give you an example. I work at ALN Kenya. I've been working there for about 21 years. My husband, for the same time, has worked in 5 institutions. Doesn't say anything about men and their longevity or sustainability. No, no, no. I think in this world, the more you move from job to job, it means you're moving upwards, isn't it? But the reason I've stayed at ELN Kenya for so long is because of the impact that I feel we do there. And I want to give an example on what we are doing around single-use plastics. It's nothing to do with our legal work, but when we looked at this area and we saw what impact it's having in our oceans, in the seas, and everywhere around us, we decided to use ALN, which is in 15 countries, to review what single plastic legislation there is in Africa. We documented it, and then we created a draft legislation that we would like the East Africa Assembly to pass. Why the East Africa Assembly? Because if the East Africa Assembly passes the law, it can be effective immediately in the East Africa countries. Thinking that we are only targeting East Africa, in the last CHOGM visit, CHOGM meeting in Rwanda, we were called to speak to parliamentarians in the South African, in the SADC region. And by speaking to them, we then catalyzed what we were doing in East Africa to happen in Southern Africa. And that's impact. We are lawyers, we write laws. We interpret laws, we draft contracts, and we thought, what can we do with our skill? And we thought we can focus on one area, and that one area is elimination of unnecessary single-use plastics, and we are building on that. I spoke on that because I am driving the single-use plastics with a couple of my partners and colleagues. Another of my colleagues, my co-managing partner, Daniel, is driving e-mobility. And he did a lot of work with Julius, and for the last 2 years, campaigned very vigorously to get incentives through the e-mobility sector. Daniel, my co-managing partner, is now leading the task force on e-mobility. So I like that we are trying to do our little thing. And I think each of you in the room are also doing your little thing. So we all need to bring our little things and advance them. So you understand why I'm telling you to sign first and then assess later? I promise you can take it to the bank. You will have things that your organization can do that will drive climate action. I want to conclude with another quote by Marshall McLuhan. And he says, there are no passengers on spaceship Earth. We are all crew. For the Kenyans in the room, what they're saying, in the matatu, in the mathri of the earth, hakuna makanga, hakuna wadhi, sisi sote ni makanga. What that means, for those who don't understand that French, is there are no passengers, there are no people who are coming to be told wear your safety belt and if there's a problem, we'll come and help you or we'll serve you. No, we are all crew members because we have to save our Mother Earth. We all have a role to play. Some may play larger roles, but none are insignificant. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Once again, let's appreciate Rosa for her articulate way of bringing in this particular agenda. There are no makanga. Now, everybody has a role to play. And at this moment, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to open the session just for a bit of comments here and there from some of the persons here present in the room. And we have some mics going around that will be there, ready for your views here and there. And so if you can, at this particular time, and I love me, Dr. to call you Mwalimu today because you've been baptized that today. Mwalimu has set the pace. It's a peer conversations, and we have in the room the voices that matter. As I promised you, we have rapporteurs at the back who are still taking note of that. And just allow me to also say this, and I know this may not be very good context, but my background is what we call Presbyterian, and they don't wait for a lot of volunteers. If they don't wait for that, they appoint people sometimes. So if you see me just point at you, it means I feel like you can say something, and you have no choice. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody who wants to volunteer, that's the one way. But in the house, though, we have one of our giants, I can see. We have one of our giants in the house, and that is none other than Safaricom. If you heard Sanda Ujebo speak before, well, that's where she came from. And we have Peter in the house, and I know Mwalimu started with you at some point asking to say a few things, but what role do you see? And that's my key question today for everybody around here. What is the one thing that you think you can contribute in climate action as has been set as the agenda? Please, pass the mic to him, he's more than ready. Good morning.
Maybe the user. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Peter Ndegwa from Safaricom. Thank you, James, for inviting us this morning. So, of course, as Safaricom, we are the leader in the region in terms of telecommunication and mobile financial services. And I think I want to echo what James says, which is, first of all, we need to make sure that we come together as Africans to really lead this agenda as ourselves, rather than actually complaining and all that stuff. So I really want the kind of the proactive piece as a unit. And then the second is partnerships. There's no one who can do it alone. So the asks from government, I think, is very, very important. But also the role that we play as private sector. But if I now focus on us as individual companies or as private sector, for me, it's about commitment to very explicit things we will do, rather than just speak every day. I remember I went to COP27, and we were talking about what is the one or two commitments that we can make and really shift the dial. Because if we don't make commitments, then frankly, it's not going to happen. And Sanda mentioned about the BLC, Africa Business Coalition, which we formed last year. There has been significant shift in the commitments we made last year, and we are going to be talking about this today. So it's actually progressing that agenda. So I will sign James, and I will commit so that Safaricom will lead. And certainly also how we use technology and digital to really ensure that we can measure, we can report, we can actually find the integrity of what we are saying, and that, especially in this whole decarbonization, the carbon credit market, there's a lot of opportunity for technology to play a very big role. So thank you, and thank you for the invite.
Thank you so much, Peter Ndegwa. I can see a hand there, but I wanted as well to hear, because this is the telco sector, I wanted to hear as well from the manufacturing sector, a voice from the manufacturing sector. Anybody in the house? I can see a lot of them before I point one. Please pass the microphone to my good friend Vimal. He's right there, and one of the giants around as well in the area of manufacturing. One or two things, sir.
Thank you, MC.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for inviting us here. I think two things that come up very clearly is how many people really understand what climate finance is, and how do we simplify this for everyone? Because I think it's become very, very complex. And I think when you talk to manufacturers and say, fine, what's happening? They all talk about what our lady lawyer talked about, is just reducing plastics, remove plastics from the environment. That's one single thing that people talk about. Then they say replacing bulbs with LED, and that's it. I think the whole thing around what it means and what it means to the environment, because if we do it alone, right, and my neighbors are still not doing the same thing, we have a problem. So I'm just saying, even if it's Kenya alone, if it's not Africa as a whole, we will have a problem. Again, the West. I think a lot of these situations that have been created are around helping the polluter in the West to try and get some offsets from Africa. I think this is where, in Africa, if we're doing climate projects, we don't have the advantage, because you have to prove additionality, you can't even sell in the compliance markets. Our carbon credits, VERs or CERs, are right now selling at $2 to $5. And in the compliance markets, they're selling at $50 to $80. Yeah. Why? Why this disparity? I think this is something that probably the business community can bring up and say, fine, can we have access to sell our carbon credits, which are verified, validated, checked fully? I'm clear with compliance, but if they're done, then they should be selling at the same price, rather than say we have to sort of have a penalty for that, number one. Number two, I think simplifying it for a lot of people. Because a lot of people are saying, let's go plant trees. Somebody said it earlier. We go and do something green, and we do a lot of green stuff. But then when you try and monetize it, it takes you 4 or 5 years in the UNFCCC to get validation. I think this is something that we really need to bring out, whether it's aggregators or whatever, to be able to bring it to Kenya or to Africa and say, fine, here we are, this is how you can do it. So for manufacturing, can we do that for manufacturing? It's fine. If you now start reducing hydrocarbons, you start reducing your carbon footprint or your environment footprint, this is how you benefit and monetize it. Or bring them all together and say, fine, as a group, if you do this together, then you can monetize it. I think this is something that is more important. So 2 things that I would want from this business meeting would be, let's go and say, let's have access to selling in the compliance markets, number 1. Number 2, remove the clause on additionality for Africa. Why? Because the clause on additionality means if you are not a polluter, you can't claim the credits. So you have to prove that you're a bad person, and now you become better, you're reformed, and therefore you get the credits. I think that clause for Africa could be removed because we are not contributing to the global climate problems as much as what other people are doing, and we're still contributing good, carbon sinks or sequestration here. I think that's important. So if we can get that done, rather than just say, okay, we're removing plastics, and such things that single use, whatever, I think that's a single agenda that's small. Bigger than that is, where do we get benefit from this? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vimal. So I think I'll allow one more because I was waiting for the table to get ready and we're ready to sign in. It doesn't mean that we're still collecting all the signatures. So if we could have at least a lady speak as well.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
thank you. I will pull that angle. Good morning. A quick word about who I am, just to anchor about what I'm going to say. I'm the Vice President for Project Development of CWB Global. We develop 60,000 megawatt of green hydrogen projects in Africa, 40,000 megawatt of green hydrogen projects in Argentina, and about 60,000 megawatt of green hydrogen projects in Australia. And that's why I'm here. I'm a born and bred from Namibia, so I'm an African talking about green hydrogen development across the world. It is extremely, this session, and it wasn't a coincidence that I was invited to this session, and thank you so very much, because it is a fantastic opportunity to pledge with you my passion. I believe that Africa should use its capital to leverage other capital. And I think everybody is always talking about, what is the skin in the game? If Africans, if we start proving skin in the game and start showing that we actually believe in our own country, in our own continent, we will get amazing lower cost of capital investment. And why do we need this? Africa needs, and I like the idea, we have title and ownership. It changed the angle of the discussion immediately. We need to utilize our talent at source. We have so much talent. If I look across that room, we have so much talent. We need to utilize our talented resource. And we need to finance and allow the capital available for that talent to actually flourish at source. We need to build an African ecosystem to support Africa's projects. The goods, the services, the manufacturing, the components, the equipment, the consultancy, the financing, the legal advisors, the technical advisors, they're all here. We need to build that ecosystem at source, and for that, we need to fund micro, small, medium, and large African enterprises to be able to participate meaningful in projects developed in Africa. It's going to take a bit.
Just the last point, maybe.
Second last point. We need to finance investing in equipment and manufacturing equipment in Africa. And you know why it's so important? Because it makes sense. It makes commercial sense. That's why it's so important. We have the raw materials, we have the energy, we have the electricity, we have the projects. So why would we export everything, get it manufacturing in some other far place, and import it back? In the same time, burning those green fuels on the ships which we produce in Africa. It just doesn't make sense. We cannot wait and wait until we have all the answers. We need to have a leap of faith. We need to start forming partnerships that are nimble and strong enough that we actually strengthen our partnerships as we resolve the challenges. We cannot sit back and wait until, and I like this, we not be part of the crew until the crew tells us how to behave. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and definitely very articulated well. Ladies and gentlemen, let's us first of all get to the sign-in ceremony, because we have a few of us here as well who will be jumping back to the forum. So please allow, I know we had a lot of submissions. I'll still open the session again, but we want to first of all sign to release some of the people who need to go to the summit. So please allow me to invite Daktari. Please, if you could kindly lead forward. And of course, I want to invite as well Karim, Director ALN, to kindly come as well. For this particular session, I'll be calling 2 at a time, because we have about 6 signatures going down. So this is when it happens. If we could have some of the participants as well getting ready, and photographers if you want to take, because we want to show evidence of the private sector-led initiative in this climate section and agenda. So we have ALN represented as well, and we have Dr. James representing Equity, so if you could kindly sign. And of course, we have Carol. I don't know whether Carol is here now. Oh, great. Good to see you, Carol, representing KEPSA. And we have, of course, Rosie Glazebrook, the CEO Commonwealth as well. If you could kindly come forward as well for the signing. Let's appreciate them for that. Great. Don't go too far, because we're going to take a picture. Okay, excellent. So we have Carol, and John Bosco Kalisa, Executive Director, East Africa Business Council. Yes, so if you could kindly come as well. Thank you. Good to see you, Carol. And of course, John Bosco, representing the Executive Director, representing East Africa Business Council. If you could kindly come. And I know John had several points to give in, but for now, let's sign. As you have been promised by the lawyer in the house, all is well. All is well. Just sign first, and we'll give the other comments. We also have the Kenya Association of Manufacturers represented in the house. I'm sure Anthony Mwangi, the CEO, is here. Excellent. I can see you coming forth. You could kindly come and put pen to paper representing all the manufacturers in the house. Thank you. Appreciate the two as well for doing this. And of course, Anthony, KAM, Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Can I put this pen to paper? Of course, I have the signatures here. I have a copy of them of Sando Jumbo Global Compact, and of course, Stephen Jackson as well. As they promised before they left, they put their signatures down, and so we are glad that they did that. A round of applause. We have signed. All right. So just before I allow anything else to happen, Carol, if you could kindly take about, let me call them 140 seconds. So Carol, please come and just share. Carol had said that she had to pass via the summit and do 1 or 2 things very quickly to represent today. And she asked for 140 seconds, which I have given you because of the powers vested in me. So please, kindly.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's a really exciting morning because there's a lot happening. And for Kenya to be hosting this and seeing all this private sector who are here today. So because I missed a lot of what was said earlier, trying to maneuver many other meetings, I will not speak into the details, but I just wanted to say, for us as KEPSA, our role has always been to influence policy. But when it comes to to climate change, our role has moved beyond influencing policy. So yes, we're still influencing policy. We're working very closely with government. We did work on the climate change, the private sector climate change strategy, 2022 to 2030, which is what we are really working with the private sector to implement, looking at all of you and what you're doing. We're very happy to see, especially the banks lead on the ECG reporting, Equity, KCB, NCB, and others. And we're looking forward to all the other sectors to lead in that. But also other initiatives. We all remember the drought last year and how you all came together. I've never been so proud of the private sector in Kenya. Over R1 billion in cash and a lot in kind. And I know a lot of you have continued to do a lot of initiatives around that. Then we have the second, only private sector plastic pact in Africa. Second to South Africa. And again, that we're implementing. And I know a lot of the companies from Petco and others who are doing a lot of work around plastics and how really we can turn that, Taka ni Mali, by Mary Gesho and others who are turning plastics and really saying we can use these plastics to really make things out of them that are useful, from tables to anything else that we can use. For me, those are the things that make me proud. Then the tree planting, you've all rallied. We made a call to all of you on the 12 billion planting trees, and all of you have contributed either in cash, you've taken initiatives around tree planting, and you also contributed financing, other initiatives around financing strategies around tree planting. And I think we are well going into that. And let me just say, and I've seen, I was in New Delhi last week for B20, and 5 years later, the last time I was there 5 years ago, and the place is completely different, all green. Looking at every angle, areas to even plant trees along the streets, along pathways, and I thought Nairobi is on the way there, but we can do more, and I think the private sector can lead that. So for me, as we sign this strategy that we've worked together with Equity, KM, UN Global Compact to put together, is for us to implement step by step. And as was said earlier by Ellen, there's something for each one of us. Yesterday we were talking about green energy and how green hydrogen can transform lives and economies in Africa. And because we have beyond enough, already 70 projects in Africa on green hydrogen, and more can be done. And I think as we sit here, it's for us to reflect how we can turn our steel industries, our aluminium, our shipping, our aviation using green hydrogen. So without saying a lot more, because a lot has been said, I just want to say how proud I am of the private sector from Kenya and from Africa. And as we come together on this strategy, we'll be working very closely with each one of you and all our partners. As you know, as you saw me signing with the East African Business Council, we are the focal point as KEPSA of East African Business Council, and all the umbrella bodies come together around East African Business Council. But what we want to do is go to each of the economic blocks and form similar organizations so that we can coordinate ourselves around this aspect of climate change. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carol. Ladies and gentlemen, I have exactly 9 minutes, and I just wanted to just get 2 quick comments before I invite Daktari to close the session. Please, there were some hands that were up. I don't want to close anymore. So please, if we could have the mic passed to him. We had an agreement with him that he will take 60 seconds. Please go ahead. It's fine. Just speak to it. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm John Bosco Kalisa, the CEO of East African Business Council. Just to say thank you to the Equity Group. You've made it, and I want to thank you, thank CAM, thank KEPSA, for this unified voice of the private sector. Just 2 comments I want to make that are very important. As we talk about driving green growth, climate finance solutions, let's not forget Made in Africa revolution. We must ensure that our products, our services, does integrate environment into the production arena. So I think it is very important that we engage, we support our SMEs, especially micro, small, and medium enterprise. It is very important, the group CEO of Equity, that the issue of de-risking Africa, you take it at your hand. Because we've been perceived as a continent that is more risky. That's why financing is very expensive for Africa. So it starts with us. Let's make it. Let's drive it. Let us own it. And I think I'm very happy that the voice of the private sector will be heard during Nairobi Declaration.
Yeah.
Finally, let's strengthen our partnership. Private sector, development partner, and with our government. We will achieve a win-win situation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. If I could have one more final comment, hopefully a special. Oh, great. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Phyllis Migwi. I'm the country director, Microsoft. And I thought it's important for a technology person to just throw a comment in the hat. So the conversation has happened around the opportunity that is there. And yesterday someone challenged me and said, we're having the conversation at cabinet, we're having the conversation in boardrooms, but we haven't taken the conversation to the living rooms. And I think that as we celebrate how far we've come, is the opportunity we also need to be looking at. Right now, Africa is everyone's big opportunity, and we are all at the table. The reason they're seeing the opportunity are the efforts that have happened from the leaders in this room. But I think, and I will borrow from now your Mwalimu James, I'll borrow from Mwalimu. Last year in a meeting with him, he challenged me as the leader of what is seen as an American company on what we're doing down the value chain. I think the opportunity goes beyond the conversation we're having here to how do we impact the smaller organizations, you talked about SMEs, in our supply chain. How do we actually get this big conversation, the resources we have in the big organizations here, to actually impact down the line? Because for me, Vimal, that's how you get the conversation to the living rooms. That's how you get it to the startup that's looking to engage with us. So I think there's an opportunity there. Then there's also, this conversation requires that we have skilled resources. A lot of you in the room will have a sustainability officer. You probably have a team. But what happens to the rest of the organization? So I think the other opportunity in investment is how we scale. And I want to raise my hand and say, as an organization, because of the legacy that we've had, we are actually ready to partner with you in the room and with other organizations on a sustainability skills roadmap. Why is that important? Right now, we have gurus who are coming up because they did one certification. But actually, that's not what we need. We need someone who's able to understand where is the business going, what are the outcomes, and then how do I actually plug in not just the efforts that we're doing in the large organizations, but what we're doing in the value chain so that we can influence everyone. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you so much for that, and appreciate her as well for that. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to invite Daktari to kindly come and give closing remarks and really way forward out of this.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for a very engaging morning. Vimal, the reason why there is the African Climate Summit is to ensure all the errors of omission and commission over the last 28 years hopefully are corrected through the Nairobi Declaration. That's really, or to put them on the agenda for debate along the way. I think Rosa talked a lot about aligning with the Nairobi Declaration. It's simply because maybe as private sector on our own, we may not be able to carry some of the issues to the logical conclusion. And that is why, like, the interest of the issue of African risk is in joint statement, such that we aligned perfectly. It's public sector and private sector carrying the same message from the African economy. So that alignment was very, very central so that we could be able to do. But I think the opportunity from Namibia, very good. I think that is, and I quote verbatively President Ruto's statistics yesterday. For the green minerals, at the current price, what Africa is exporting to go and solve the climate challenge, it's only $11 billion. If we went to the next stage, just of a basic value addition, it moves to $50 billion. If we move to what our sister is advocating, it becomes $7 trillion. Can I repeat? What Africa is exporting to solve the climate problem in form of raw material, we are getting $11 billion. If we add basic value to the raw material, we get $50 billion annually. If we go to the last phase, finished products, we get $7 trillion annually. Now, that is why this problem can't be solved without the private sector. Government, public sector, as we were told by Rosa, I think it was President Reagan, the job of a government is defined. It's not adding value. to minerals. That's the role of the private sector to do it commercially. And that is why, for me, the solution lies in the hands of the private sector. But as Ebre articulated, finance must be at the center of the conversation. But I think the biggest one is finance from an investment perspective. It must be investment, because you are not going to add value without making investment. Lastly, because of seeing the role of the private sector, we had thought and challenged the World Bank. And we had had very interesting conversation when we asked the World Bank, you have been in Africa for the last 60 years. Kindly share with us the blueprint of African Development Plan. And there has never been one, including by the UN. Anything done in Africa is ad hoc, is reactory. So he said, no. We'll be bold enough. We asked the World Bank to give us resources. They gave us 20 top economists and development leaders. We put our teams together, and we came with the first blueprint we are calling the African Recovery and Resilient Plan. So I want to invite you, as you go out, pick a copy and see the role as private sector we can play in solving the climate issue using our day-to-day responsibility of doing business and making money, and making big money like 7 trillion in one sector, just one sector. That is how quickly Africa can be transformed. And that is why we were humble enough to say, no, let's first of all recover from COVID, let's recover from degradation. Lastly, let me say this, because that is very positive. The upside of that positive is the existential threat. Africa's 30 to 50% of total wealth is from natural capitals, nature. 60% of African economy's GDP is from nature. And that is why it's an existential threat to Africa, the concept of climate change, because it's a destruction of nature. Yet, Africa are living from nature. 60% of our economy's GDP comes from nature, unlike any other continent. So it's in our interest to provide leadership, not to do following. And that is why it was important for us to put our declaration as a voice. We give direction, we define the narrative. This is the narrative that is relevant and appropriate to Africa because it's an existential threat. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. Pick a copy, a virtual copy, preferably of the statement, study it. The most important thing is commitment. It may not be a physical signing, it's commitment. And those tabulation we were told, the commitment, what you do, because it has to take collective effort to save Africa. Thank you very much. And let's lead to KICC, those who are going to KICC, then we start lobbying. It's not just lobbying by statement, let's also talk to our leaders, not to leave the private sector behind. Be the champion of the African private sector. Thank you very much.
Yes. Daktari, I've been asked by the entire media houses around here that don't stay too far because they would want to get a comment or so. Ladies and gentlemen, one quick announcement. The ABLC private sector plenary session will be held at 1 p.m. at the African Union House at KICC today, 5th September. This announcement is because a lot of you will be attending or have been requested to attend. I only end by saying this: in the era of sustainability, we still have a lot of breakfast to be served, so kindly help us clear it because we have to be sustainable. Thank you so much. My name is Maina Chege. I've been your host. Asanteni sana.